Welcome to Determine Out Loud, our podcast series that's all about minding your business in contract management and source to pay. And now, your host, Buyers Meeting Point owner, Kelly Varner.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of Determine Out Loud. Today, my guest is Brendan Bolander, a determined business consultant. Welcome, Brendan.
Thanks for having me, Kelly.
Sure. So, what we want to talk about today is the fact that Determined recently made an announcement about their new contract management app for Salesforce. Now, obviously, Salesforce is a huge name in the B2B world, but I'm sure a lot of procurement professionals out there were saying, what? I thought Salesforce was for salespeople, but contract management is usually talking to me, because it's so easy to forget that we all work for companies that have both sales organizations and procurement organizations. Both have external relationships, and both, in fact, are heavy users of contracts. So at the end of the day, it really is about information connectivity. So, Brendan, given the fact that you're in a client-facing role, what kinds of opportunities do you see for companies to better centralize and leverage all of their contract information, not just from a procurement perspective?
Yeah, well, like you said, Kelly, any organization is going to have contracts on the procurement side, on the sales side, and all sorts of different areas that are going to be kind of managed by different teams. And so with a system like Determine, it's really helpful to be able to have kind of one central repository that all these different teams can use but manage their contracts independently. And so I think that's one of the big advantages of a contract management system, particularly like Determined, is kind of being able to enable all of those different teams to do what they need to and manage that contract process more efficiently, and then have insight into the contracts they do have and how to manage those over the course of their life cycle.
So given the fact that you're talking about life cycle, with all of these different groups, it's obviously an advantage to have the information retained centrally and to have it be accessible centrally, but for everyone to have that autonomy to go off and drive towards their business objectives. So let's keep it for about the people for just a minute and about relationship management. Now, whether you're talking about this from the buyer or supplier perspective, how do you think having that centralized information available to support not only continuity over time, but between people? I mean, naturally, you're going to have transitions, you're going to have some turnover, you're going to have job changes. How does that centralized information allow companies to ultimately drive more value from external relationships?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big goals, right, is making sure that people are able to do their job easily. And having technology enable that rather than hinder that. So I think that's one of the big things we see with that new Salesforce app that you mentioned, being able to enable people on the sales team to focus most of their time and efforts on actually selling and kind of integrating with their the technology they're using in Salesforce to make it as easy as possible for them to also get their contract started and determine. And then kind of on the other side with your legal teams or the teams that are managing the contracts, the quicker that they can get that information from the sales team, the easier it's going to be for them to then prepare the contract, get it up, have anyone who needs to review it, and kind of make that whole process more efficient. And then you also mentioned kind of the external side of that in terms of having your suppliers or your clients involved in that process. And again, I think the easier it is internally and the quicker you can be and the more efficient and have things ready to go, the better relationships you're going to be able to have with those companies that you're working with. If you can get reviewed on quickly and efficiently and keep that process moving forward, it's going to enable you as a company to be more successful in your relationships that'll eventually either drive savings or drive sales and impact your bottom line.
And that speed and simplicity are important. I mean, certainly from a procurement perspective, we talk all the time about wanting to be a customer of choice, right? And part of that is making sure that the process that suppliers have to go through is logical and transparent, but it also means that they have usability expectations, right? They want the technology that they work through, I believe you said, to really enable them rather than to hinder them. It should not create a hurdle in the process. And the exact same thing is going to be true on the sales side, that the last thing anyone needs is to have gone through this whole procurement process, and then you start working on the contract and it's like hitting a brick wall, right? Everybody comes to a standstill. Now, have you found that procurement's perspective on that speed, and legal's perspective on that speed, and supplier perspectives on that speed, are we all kind of approaching this from the same mindset in terms of how easy, how quick, how simple should it be? Or do you think that this contract, whether it's the initiation process or whether it's during the review process, are there different points of view that come to bear on that? Something where technology can kind of help facilitate the different way that people first look at and then ultimately interact with that contractual information?
Yeah, I think there can be different points of view depending on the organization itself and the parts of the organization that you're looking at. So, for example, one thing we'll see is when you've got maybe two different teams, like a sales team versus a procurement team, kind of the goals of the people in charge are managing that process in terms of what they need from those teams who are inputting that information is going to be different. So, for example, with a sales team, a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, you want them to be focusing on the sales, and you really just want them to be inputting kind of the minimum information they need and providing that to you so that you can kind of take the burden off of them and make sure that you're getting the contract up and into the language they need. And so, in terms of what your needs from the sales team are, that might be different than from, say, your procurement team, where you kind of need to have a more information about what exactly they're trying to accomplish, what kinds of suppliers they're looking at, why they made the decision they did to go with a certain supplier, what their goals are, and kind of get that information. So I think there are, depending on what types of contracts you're looking at or what area of the organization you're looking at, I definitely think that there can be different goals in terms of what you're trying to work with those different groups and what you're trying to get out of it.
Now, one of the other benefits often associated with this idea of having a Salesforce contract management integration point is the way that it's able to keep the process moving. So we talked about it being simple and easy to initiate, but that's not the only touch point, right? We want to keep the whole review process, the contract execution process, we want to keep that flowing, and we want sales and legal and procurement and the executive team and all the different internal stakeholders that are ultimately looking to buy off of that contract. We want to keep them happy. So how would you describe the advantage of being able to maintain the momentum? You have this high point where, okay, we've made an award decision, or from the sales perspective, we've got the contract win. That's kind of your high point. How do you see the sort of business connection being of taking that high point and through technology, facilitating the energy level and keeping things moving so that everyone achieves their objectives that much sooner?
I think one of the most important things in the contract process is making sure that everyone's kind of kept up to date and on the same page and communicating effectively. And so I think it's important with any contract management system to make sure that there's clear visibility into what's going on and people are able to stay up to date on that. So, whether that's on, from the original salesperson who's able to, submit their request for a contract and kind of follow the status of it as it's being built out and negotiated, versus someone from legal who is able to be notified at the appropriate time when they need to review the contract and provide their comments on it. Making sure that there's clear visibility at every point in the process and that those handoffs are occurring smoothly and efficiently is really important in terms of being able to keep those people engaged, keep those people working hard to make sure that the contract is accomplishing the goals of the organization.
Well, and at the end of the day, I mean, just like a sourcing process where it's not just procurement, it's not just internal stakeholders, there's a whole team of people that play different roles that ebb and flow through the course of that project. A contract is no different. And as you mentioned, having that centralized visibility into status, having centralized access in terms of information, allows all of the people that are peripherally involved with the contract process to have access to what they need so that they don't even unintentionally become a roadblock to that contract going from approved to being valid and fully in place for the organization to benefit from it. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about some of the exciting new opportunities associated with bringing the procurement and sales contract process a little bit closer together.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Kelly.
And thank you everyone for listening. Please be sure to look out for our next episode of Determine Out Loud.